Okay, I'm pleased to be able to moderate our second panel for today. This morning we looked at some of the national policy structures here within the country, and we looked at a lot of governance programs to manage security. What we want to do in this next session is continue with the governance programs, but then move into more of a focus on how do you operationalize operationalize network security to defend your networks, as well as detecting and responding to attacks when they occur. We do have, I think you're going to enjoy this because the panel that we've put together is very diverse and comes at this problem from some very different and interesting perspectives. I'd like to introduce first Arne Wenneker. Arne, again, brings dual perspectives, both from industry and now from government, working with the Ministry of Energy and Industry. His particular strengths, and welcome, Arne.
Thank you.
Again, his particular strength is looking at governance structures and what works in different environments to provide both a high level of network security and an environment that's auditable, so you can really measure what you're doing. Our second panel member, and again, please, a warm welcome for Arne. Our second panel member is returning to the stage for the second time. Claudia Cicero is the Chief Information Security Officer for Maersk. Again, please give Claudia a warm welcome. Claudio brings some very interesting perspectives, as you heard him so articulately this morning talk about the work that he's done in a number of different forums, but in particular, again, with the Energy Sector Information Security Expert Committee, which is critical to the way the country goes forward. Our third panel member, Abdul Sattar, is Head of Information Communications and Technology for the Qatar Fuel Additives Company. Please welcome Sattar. Thank you. He brings some very unique perspectives, in particular having taken their organization through ISO 27001 certification across all of the business units of the organization, and he'll give us some perspective there. They are now starting through an update of that process as well. And finally, but certainly not the least, we have Yasir Hamza with us. Yasir comes to us from the oil and gas sector as well, and it's great to have you and your perspectives. Yasir has a lot of experience in designing and implementing mission-critical IT structures with a security focus. One of his particular focuses is on defining the business drivers that are tied to security and helping security managers better articulate things in that environment. So with that, we have constituted the panel, and I will join them as we talk through some of their focus areas. I'd like to lead off. Arne, please.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As the as Tim said, I'm here from the Ministry of Energy and Industry. I'm an advisor to the minister on areas of corporate governance and assurance, and this is where, from my perspective, the rubber hits the road. And because if you look at the industry within the sector, 39 companies plus, responsible for 77 million metric tons of LNG production per year, a great number of petrochemical products across the board, both distilled and refined, as well as oil, responsible for about 70% of the revenue that the government receives. So from our perspective, continued production and unhampered production is very, very important. And given the nature of the business that we're in, there is a great deal of automation. So what we look at when we're examining the industry, we look at, okay, how can we ensure that this will continue to operate unimpeded and allow us to deliver products to our clients on a consistent basis and earn the revenue that we need to fund this great state of Qatar in its number of different areas. With respect to infrastructure for the 2022, for health, education, roadworks, you name it. It's all contingent on the money or the revenue that's generated. So as QP is sort of the apex of that, that whole, let's say, corporate construct, we look at cybersecurity in terms of three components, three pillars, which I'm going to go over, and they need to be in balance. Not one of them is more important than the other, but we look at governance frameworks and practices. And it's quite evident from what I've witnessed this morning that there is a great deal of development and maturity with respect to governance and governance frameworks and practices. The second one, and we look at this in terms of people, both on the practitioner side as well as on the operation side, because it's very important. We look at what kind of skills are in place. Do we have the technical skills available to us to provide security? But then on the flip side, do we also have the appreciation on the operation side of what cybersecurity requires? We look at, in terms of, do both sides of the equation have the appropriate judgment, the appropriate expertise, the appropriate training to ensure that cybersecurity is optimal? And we do recognize, though, that sometimes there's going to be a breach. We just know that. And then the other thing that we look at is corporate culture. In the presentations this morning with BA Systems, from Ooredoo, it was quite evident that culture is something that we appear to be struggling with. Who's responsible for setting the culture? Because what we need is an integrated corporate culture that allows us to deal with cybersecurity internally so that we can work together both as cybersecurity experts as well as those people who are the consumer of cybersecurity, as well as it allows us to deal with the external environment, those people who we need to work with to maintain cybersecurity, as well as those people who are threatening us. So from a governance perspective, we look at the governance frameworks and the practices as providing us with a great deal of comfort that at least somebody's doing something according to an international standard that that's based on best practice and allow appropriate outcomes in terms of creating an appropriate environment, detecting threats, responding to them, and then sharing the information so that everyone can benefit from it. And that's where ICT Qatar comes in is very important in setting that governance and that strategic framework for creating cybersecurity, as well as other institutions like Kiri, through the Qatar Foundation, and then we also have a grand strategy whereby we're trying to take practitioners, academics and government and the business environment and focus on one of the grand strategies, which is cybersecurity. So that's how we look at it, and I get a great deal of comfort coming here as a representative of the minister, and I'm going to be able to say to him, yes, there seems to be a great deal of interest, there's a great deal of work going on, and it's something that nobody's complacent about. So those are my opening comments.
Arne, thank you in particular for introducing the three pillars. I think we're going to want to return to those, so thank you. And now we'd like to move to Claudio for your perspectives.
Sure, thank you. You know, this afternoon session has several key points to discuss. I want to touch upon a couple of them initially, and one of them is about the building of the culture. We talked about this previously in the morning session as well, where one of the panelists was discussing about the consequences aspect, and I also mentioned a little bit about the personalization. You know, the employees, our staff, you know, they really need to see how what we're trying to achieve is not just for the benefit of the organization itself, but also benefits them personally and their families. So it's about, you know, putting the connections together for them and showing them that the principles and the good practices that they are learning about through your awareness program not only applies in the office, but also applies with them at home with their families. You know, learning about how to, how should I say, minimize the amount of content that they share on social media networks, being more scrutinizing of the connection requests they get, whether they be friend requests through Facebook or connection requests through LinkedIn, things like that. Also, part of that aspect about education and awareness that will help the organizations as well is that they will become more aware of the types of fraudulent activities that take place over the internet through email correspondence, etc., that potentially can cross over into the corporate side. And we've seen that even in Maersk Oil, where we've received emails at the very, very high levels of the organization appearing to come from an even higher level of the organization, requesting that they immediately transfer funds and things along those lines. So, you know, it's building that awareness around everything relating to cybersecurity, and then making, like I said, like the connection to their personal lives with their families will protect them in all aspects. You know, in the papers, you'll see almost on a weekly basis some kind of new scam that's taking place in Qatar, where people have been duped into giving up their life savings, you know, over the internet for different things. So that's a contextual aspect of what I'm discussing. As far as the consequences are concerned, recent studies have shown that there's really only a small percentage of the employees that willfully disobey or do not follow policies. A very small percentage. It's not about they don't know. It's no longer that can no longer be an excuse they don't know. It's that they're purposely going against what's required of them. And they do that because they have not seen consequences being meted out to other staff doing exactly the same thing. So, as an example, if you have users that continually infect their machines and potentially the entire environment by transferring infected USB stick data or browsing sites that share content, you know, videos, music, whatever it may be, and they continually infect their machines, will start blocking their USB ports, start restricting or blocking their internet access. Eventually they'll learn their lesson, but until that happens, those particular people, a very small percentage, will continue to be your bane, your problem. And then there's another point on here about the taking a risk-based approach. I'm one of the, I guess, small minority of people that don't believe in a risk-based approach. It's a nice theory. But in practice, what happens in organizations around the world is that that's the cover-up for a security cost reduction program, rather than taking a true risk-based approach. Unless there's an actual basis for that program to follow, then most likely it's just a whitewashing of situation. So to have it truly a risk-based approach, you need to identify your critical business processes, your critical assets, the supporting infrastructure for it. Then, of course, perform the various business impact analysis, the risk assessments, and then drive your program with that information. Unless that's done for the entire environment to identify the critical processes and critical assets, unless it's done for the entire environment, it really is a whitewash. And it's just a waste of time, because eventually the organization will find itself in a situation that may have been even worse than it started off with. So that's really my opening comments.
Thanks, Claudio.
Certainly.
I think we survived. For a moment there, when You said you didn't believe in a risk-based approach. I was looking for lightning coming down.
Yeah, it's not very popular. Just the same thing as taking a business-focused approach. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah, I think that I'm sure will generate some discussion with the audience, so thank you. And now to Abdul.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Abdul Sattar. I am from Qatar Fuel Additives Company. We are producing 2 petrochemical products, MTBE and methanol. As Mr. Jim said in the introductory session, that QAFAC implemented information security compliance ISO 27001 in 2013. And it was certified by British Standard Institute. This implementation has been done all over the business units in QAFAC, in energy, the plant side as well as the back office side. It's a little bit challenge to implement or the effectiveness of those policies and procedure in place. Still we are improving, and we are in the transition period of upgrading the 2005 version to 2013. What I can share with you that during the implementation, the biggest challenge what we faced that to identify information asset register, which is not only in the back office, in the plant side also it's a tedious job. What we had done with the management's, of course, strong support, we create information security task force from each department. And they really work dedicatedly and identify those assets. Accordingly, the risk assessment has been done. And effectively, of course, the necessary measurements or mitigation or the procedures we developed, and we are still in the journey of further improvement. At the time we can explain further more about the implementation side. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Abdul. Implementation of 27001 not only is an achievement, but I think you get out of it exactly what you put into it. And we'll look forward to talking some more about maybe some of the challenges that you saw that would be useful for other organizations. So thank you very much. And now, Yasir, we would very much appreciate your perspectives as well.
Hi. I hate to sound cliche, but to have a good security program, you need to have a holistic approach. So I understand Claudio's concerns that by focusing on the highest risk or your crown jewels per se, okay, you fail to recognize that you have your weakest links that might not be the most important things for you as a business, but you can have a major incident because of these, non-important, between brackets systems. So I agree with him that the danger of it, that's why you need to have a holistic approach. Sounds cliche, yeah, but you need to cover almost everything to be secure. And Abdul Sattar mentioned asset management, okay, and it's a big surprise for me a few years back it was a big surprise for me to know that even Fortune 500 companies don't do asset management properly. So they don't know their assets. That's a big problem, So that's why I talked about operationalization of security, and part of that is that, okay, everything has to be done securely. that's the only way. Otherwise, we will not have security. It's similar to safety. So whatever we do, we have to do in a secure way. So it's a culture, it's a behavior, it's in everything. It permeates our existence, everyday life. It's now, we exist in a computer-controlled world. Everything now is computerized. We have to accept that. So everything we do, we have to do it in minding information security, and thinking of safety, and thinking of even I might argue even raising our children to understand, because we grow up in a world where there are vehicles, right? So early on in our early development in our life, we learn to look left in the road when crossing the road, and to look right. So it's been something that's instilled in us early on. So okay, let's teach our children to look left, when they use their computer. So unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. There is no panacea, and we have to do things the hard way. That's my only comment. So everything has to be, we have to look at all the fronts, we have to fix everything in the castle, and we have to make sure that there's no. And when things do happen, we need to manage the incident properly. Someone mentioned that we need to have incident response. We have to focus equally on protection, detection, and incident response. That's the only way of doing it. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Yasser. One of the things you noted was the importance of asset management. And one of the things that we find when we get called in to do incident response on a big breach is, unfortunately, we almost know within an hour or two of arriving why that organization got breached. Maybe not the specific attack vector, but you can tell very quickly that they don't execute well. And ironically, asset management is one of those areas. It is amazing how often we have to actually deploy asset management tools as part of the incident response because it's clear they don't even know what's on their network. But one of the other things that you mentioned that I thought was really ironic, at least 3 of the panel members mentioned culture as something that's very, very important. And so I think it's probably worth spending a little bit more time exploring culture. Arn, I noted that you said it's important that people, culture, and governance be balanced, but I understand that you also have a concern that oftentimes culture is probably the poorest managed or the weakest, one of the weakest pillars of those 3.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. That's what I'm hearing today, in this morning session, and now it seems as if IT or the cybersecurity team is responsible for applying cultural standards. You have to adhere to a policy and a procedure. You have to do that, and it's really should be something coming from the board and senior management and being pushed down. Because part of the challenge is if if the IT team or the security team is responsible for implementing or ensuring conformance to a cultural standard, which is really norms, behavioral norms, what you do in a good situation, a bad situation, the interaction that you have with your teammates, that really shouldn't be up to the cybersecurity team. That should really be, the cultural tone should be set at the top by the board, accepted by the management team, and then the appropriate steps taken to make sure that everyone conforms. Because I was surprised to hear from Claudio that you've got people who actually do, let's say are responsible for 1 or 2 breaches, and then you decide to take action. If anything, that should be like a no-go zone. You know what, we've found a USB that has a virus on it, and you should be immediately censured for that and appropriate action taken. And I think that's part of the problem when I look at governance as well. At a higher level, there's got to be a greater integration between cybersecurity and operations. There seems to be a bit of an us versus them component, and really, an engineer in the field knows his business, but he doesn't know security that well. I've seen that, and vice versa. You may not know as cybersecurity specialists engineering, but that's irrelevant. You know security. And it's that division of labor and the respect of each set of skills and attributes and expertise that has to be recognized. You have to work as a team. And again, I think that comes at the top as well. So yeah, culture is very important to me because I think it really allows everyone to be aligned and achieve the business objectives, be they with respect to security or meeting their revenue goals, and allows everyone to succeed together. And I think that's part of the problem. When something goes wrong, it's easy to point a finger and say, you're responsible, as opposed to saying, hey, listen, we had an event, what do we do to move forward and avoid it from happening again? And I think that's also a cultural attribute. What do you think?
Thank you. Any other perspectives on culture that anyone wants to jump on?
Well, I agree with the point about the tone from the top. That definitely has to come from the executive members, whether it be the board, the audit committee, the compliance committee, whatever the governing body relating to this space is in your organization. There's generally a disconnect between that part of the organization that recognizes its fiduciary responsibility for cybersecurity. They know their responsibilities for protecting their organization, their environment. But how it gets translated and disseminated down through their organization, that's a whole other story. That's part of that, what you were discussing. It's not being communicated appropriately or effectively down to the next level of the executives who would then understand what their risks really are, what their responsibilities really are. They then usually think that's just an IT problem or it's a security problem or whatever. They don't actually put into perspective of what their leaders are actually looking for because they're not receiving that communication, that gap that is there generally within the different parts of the world.
And I'd like to make just one comment.
Please.
I'm not representing any a ministerial view, and this shouldn't be looked at as a criticism or a critique. Really, it's an observation that I've had over the last 20 years. Started work with Adobe, then started work doing web-based application development. We had a security breach which completely destroyed our company. And really, these are just high-level observations. These are not meant to be a finger-pointing exercise. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this is my observation and it's not indicative of what I see necessarily.
Same here.
Well, you've now introduced another interesting dimension, and frankly, that is the board interaction, and in particular, the relationship between information security professionals and the board. I heard the word gap mentioned a time or two, and it's ironic. We just commissioned about 3 months ago another Ponemon study that specifically looked at the relationship between the board and information security professionals. And what Ponemon found was that there were a number of major gaps, a gap in knowledge, and to some extent that's understandable, but a gap in perspective and understanding, in particular as it relates to incidents and what's important. And what we really tried to focus on out of that study was how do you bridge the gaps between the board and information security professional. It's so important in an organization that, in particular, when you look at the end result and breaches, that needs to be a team. And so how do you bridge those gaps? Any thoughts? Anyone that wants to jump on that? Go ahead, please.
Yeah. This is very important, the query. In our organization, of course, I agree with other speakers what they told. With the strong support from the management, you cannot success or achieve this information security compliance. Just for an example, USB. They mentioned already a sample, USB also. So blocking of the USB access, it is a challenge to IT, and including the higher level, they can ask, okay, why you block and I can't use it. Okay. So the support from the top and the compliance come in picture, it automatically is part of the culture. I'm coming back to Jim, that how you are making a bridge between the employees and to management, the gap. First of all, there are some complaints item, the clause in our information security, the standards, which we need to, first of all, awareness. Information security is everybody's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility. So everyone is part of this journey. So you need to aware employees, management, and specifically those key people, key champions of information security. And periodically, frequency-wise, you need to conduct the awareness session as well. Identify where are the area you need to improve. Like, conduct some quiz program, for example, whether they are aware about some of the complaints or the standards, and how to implement. Maybe we can buy their ideas also, how to improve in their department, because it is a shared responsibility. You need to buy their ideas. If it is meeting the standard, if it's better for our culture, implement it. It will add a value to our effectiveness of the implementation. So this type of a culture, once you create, so everybody is part of the team and their ideas coming to the picture, so we are not forcing a way to implement some of the standards, right? So this way you can make a team to achieve that information culture.
Yes, that's some very good points. I suspect that you have some very valuable perspectives, in particular with your focus on business drivers, because too often I feel that we information security professionals we talk our own language, and we don't talk in a language that's relevant to the business and to the board.
Yeah, involving the board, starts with involving your management, and it cascades down, it also cascades up. So once your chief CEO is involved and your management team is involved, and the way you are approaching security as a strategic initiative or a group of strategic initiatives, because strategic management will not look at tactical things, your day-to-day things. That you need to approach them by talking about strategic measures of what you are going to do in the organization, and you need to come up with a way of engaging them at that level. So as a security management, once you figure out how to do that by looking, first of all, coming up with a security program such as ISO 27001, and also coming up with KPIs. It's been mentioned in the previous panel, and KRIs, measures in general. Let's not call them KPIs, KRIs, or even key exception. But let's look at measures. Even exceptions can be measurements of your performance. So once you engage them at that level, like Abdul Sattar said, you don't have to fight for security controls. Actually, I had an instance where management was chasing me, actually, what happened to that implementation? What's that security project? We want it implemented now because we think that's important. So it makes your life easier to actually get support for your initiatives, and not only get the budget, but even support for the implementation and the processes and the policies and procedures and all that. So,
boards recognize when they get their various dashboards and reports, they recognize compliance levels to international standards. So one of the key things that should go up to that level is what is your maturity level, what is your implementation level to those, whether it be for the control systems ISO 62443 or to IT security, the 7000 series, or whatever other standard or framework you care to utilize, showing what your maturity level is against an internationally recognized standard gives them some perspective. And that's something that cannot be manipulated by the different layers of the organization in transit to reaching the board. So it'll be what it is when it gets there. So that's probably one of the better metrics to use in showing them what the state of the organization is, as long as it was done by a appropriately qualified auditor to do that.
Good. Well, thank you very much for those perspectives, both of you. We'd really like to open it up at this point to the questions, because I know that there are some great security thoughts and issues out there. I think we're going to have a bit of a challenge with the lighting. So if you have questions, if someone can flag the question for us. Okay, right here in front, please.
We've been hearing continuously about the core issue being due to the organization culture, and also the solution being tone at the top, support from the top. So I'm just trying to compare it with, in terms of SOX, there was similar issues, and subsequently there was a mandate that the CEO has to sign off on the accuracy of the financial reporting, and for that, the CEO has to ensure that there is a lot of due diligence done, and the process for the final numbers, it's a very I would say he puts a lot of controls to make sure that the accuracy is maintained. Now I wanted to know from the panel, is there any such compliance in any other country? So is this something which could enforce the senior management to really play a very active role for information security?
Great question. Is there, Arne, did you want to start off with that?
Sorry, Jim. Fundamentally, I don't believe that there is something that's legally obligates companies to certify that their information systems and their IT systems adhere to a certain standard. That's really for the internal control over financial reporting for Sarbanes-Oxley. I'm not aware of a standard. A lot of them might be you as a company will adhere and then get certified to ISO 27001, but it's not legally obligated from what I understand. Perhaps if you gentlemen know differently, I'd like to hear about it, because that'd be new to me.
Yeah, actually there is an interesting evolution limited to the US right now. The Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has now mandated that in publicly traded companies, in their annual report, they have to make a statement about the status of network security in the company. It's still pretty undefined and pretty loose. It's been in place now for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And in the first year, most of the statements were pretty vanilla, that they said, we've got pretty good network security and we're getting better. The place where there's now some teeth is any company that's put in a vanilla statement and has subsequently gotten breached, the SEC is starting to come down on them hard. So it's just a beginning, but as you said, like the certification of financials or some of the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, what it's done, in fact, in the US, is it's really captured the board's attention, because the board ends up essentially signing off on the annual report as well. So in that context, the combination of the highly visible breaches that we've had over the past year and the new SEC guidelines together are really driving the boards, and that's pretty positive. Any other perspectives on that?
I'd like to, it's a good thing that people are aware that compliance plays a big part in this, because, I always say this, and in my discussions, I always say that you cannot sell security as a normal business driver, even my discussion now offline, I say, security is a fear sell. It's a fear thing. So it's not a greed sell. Humans are motivated by two things, greed or fear. Security is not a greed sell. You cannot tell them, okay, you are going to gain such and such by having security. No, you are going to tell people such and such bad things will happen if you don't have security. So security, by definition, is a fear sell. So the only way that people will care about security and boards will care about security is if we make it a compliance issue. Unfortunately, that's the truth. That's a fundamental truth of security. So, yes, I believe in business drivers, yes, but again, a way of making it a proper, business driver is to make it a compliance issue. And it's good that your question was about compliance, because that's the way for making our world a safer world. Because if we learn from other industries, that's how it got done. Automotive industry, compliance, right?
Safety.
Aviation industry, compliance. Petrochemical industry, compliance. It's safer now because of compliance. You name it, okay? So even we are sitting in this hotel and it's safe for us because of fire regulations. We know that if a fire breaks, we know that regulations made it safer for us to stay in this hotel and have this big incident. And when a fire breaks, we can have our life. And thanks to compliance. Okay. So many people hate compliance and say, oh, compliance is a bad thing. But I think it's a good thing for the hygiene overall of the industry and for the safety of everyone. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth.
Yeah, the comment that I would echo there is in industries where breaches are mandatory to report, we find that the incident response operation is very easy and very straightforward because everyone's on board. In companies that are not publicly traded, or where there maybe has not been a loss of personal information or credit card information, oftentimes we see the incident response effort is minimized and kind of swept under the rug.
Yeah, and also other research, DBIR, okay? If you read the DBIR, they show that the most regulated industries have the lowest, number of breaches. So if you look, financial industry is the most, regulated, and retail is the least regulated. And so there is, the curve matches, perfectly with compliance frameworks that exist for this industry versus number of breaches. So yeah, compliance works.
Good point. Arn?
I wanted to thank you for the question because with respect to, Sarbanes-Oxley, I was thinking about the United States, but here actually locally in Qatar, under the Ministry of ICT, there will be something called the CIP Law, Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Law, which will require you as an organization to attest that you have a cybersecurity framework in place and that it is meeting, or it's been designed by management and it's working as intended. And if there are any issues that you're having, there will be, with respect to breaches, there will be a reporting mechanism that you will have, or a protocol that you will have to follow. My minister, or the minister, Dr. El-Sada, will be responsible as Minister of Energy and Industry. He'll be called the Critical Sector Authority, and all companies that have an infrastructure that are deemed to be critical to the state of Qatar, those companies will be required to report on an annual basis whether or not they are, they're meeting the protocol laid forth in that law, And if there are any breaches, there is a direct reporting mechanism as well in order to minimize the impact of breaches. I would recommend that you go to ICT Qatar and look at the CIP law. It's currently in the Amiri Dewan being discussed. There's a draft. It's been in existence for about 3 years, and it's really a bit of a leader in this with respect to cybersecurity in the GCC region, because it really pulls all the sectors together, all the government sectors together, and they will then provide the, the Amiri Dewan with an attestation that yes, we do happen to meet, we've reached a level of development and maturity, and we are, we'll maintain that. So I really appreciate the question, because with respect to the U.S., I don't know of any laws, but in Qatar, absolutely, there is a law on the books. It's in draft form, and go to ICT Qatar. You should speak with Omar Sharon. He knows all about it, and they will actually help you with your activities to conform to that law. Thank you.
Thanks, Arn. I think we had another question over on this side. There
so
it
in the
is.
past, I used to tell everybody, well, we're health institutions, so we need to do HIPAA, we need to do PCI, and we need to follow this and that because we are. So I wanted to know if in Qatar there is a way where you tell them, well, I'm doing this because I need to be 27001 compliant. I'm doing this because this website is requiring me as a government organization to follow the following rules. So I was looking for, does that exist? So if I go to ICT website, I can find out, okay, I'm doing 27001. I'm doing the following because it's 27001. And I'm doing it because the government of Qatar or ICT is requiring me to do that. So that makes it easier for me, okay, I'm doing this because of that, because of this compliance issue. And I think we answered most of that. So that was my main question.
Any comments from anyone on the panel?
It's one of the standards that's recognized by ICT Qatar as ISO 27001. So if you're compliant with that or conform to that, you'll have no problem conforming to the CIP law.
Good.
And
Abdul, did you?
Yeah, that CIP is one of the points. Second, ICT Qatar, NIA, National Information Assurance. Those policies and procedures also will helpful for this.
Good,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
guess I have one comment. All the different international standards are all based on the same principles and good practices. So as he was saying, if you're compliant with one, most likely be compliant with the other one. There are various mapping matrices available publicly, whether it be ISF, SOGP, or ISO, or whatever. I believe the appendix of the CIP law has a matrix, a mapping matrix as well. So, you can cross-reference anything and show where you're compliant on multiple fronts.
Good. Thank you, Claudio.
Sure.
Looks like we've got another question there.
Yes, so I'm all for compliance. I think this is a good idea, but if we want to be honest, it works, the best in industries where things are pretty static and do not really change a lot. If we look at IT, today's word is not going to be tomorrow's word. Things are changing all the time. So in the OT world, we could maybe do something, even though it's also changing rapidly now. And to start with, I don't even know what security is about. People have, we have tons of technical solutions to do stuff. We have very few people who can express precisely what the security policy should be. So I think we are really, the elephant in the room is, what is it that we should be complying with? How are we going to express that? So yes, it's a good idea, but it's very far away, I think.
If I can add something on that, basically when it comes to individual organization, it's up to, someone mentioned the risk tolerance or risk appetite. That's up to the individual organization to determine what their target is, what their threshold is. So if an organization determines that, hey, we don't really need to worry about this or that, then they don't. That's their decision to be made. But if an organization decides that we want to be compliant with what our peers are compliant with, and they do their due diligence in finding out what their peers are actually working or striving to be compliant with, then that's a target. As far as the technical nuances of how to achieve security, that actually is documented in reams and reams and reams of documents coming out of NIST or other types of organizations have the relevant guidelines to secure pretty much any kind of environment. It doesn't give you all the explicit details in every little aspect, but it gives you a very good start. And that's one of the things is the operational people. And I came from the operational side, right? We didn't really focus on the security side. We tried to make things work. And no longer is that acceptable just to live up to that minimum standard. It has to work and it has to be secure. Whichever way you accomplish it, it's up to that individual organization to decide.
Yes,
I understand.
yes,
Your question is about the dynamic nature of the IT industry, and that the standards that we establish or the compliance frameworks we establish run into the risk of being irrelevant after a few years, right? So, case in point is PCI, that they have a few list of controls, and after a few years it's irrelevant because those controls are no longer, protecting us, like antivirus, for example, right? So, my response to that is that there are two different kinds of, compliance frameworks. There is prescriptive and descriptive, right? So, if you have a prescriptive framework that tells you, okay, I have a prescription, go do this and this, very specific measures, and you will be secure, like PCI, right? And there is the descriptive frameworks, like ISO 27001, like in the United States, information security, the federal FISMA.
FISMA. Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is, it's not a prescriptive, it's descriptive, similar to ISO. It tells you, okay, the things that are not going to change, things like manage your risks, know your assets, manage your incidents, those things are not likely to change, okay? For example, the CIP law, which was mentioned, it's very high level. It tells you, okay, manage your information security program, manage your risks. There's a certain document which is dynamic, it's called ICS security standard, which changes. Okay, it can change even several times in a year, but you have to comply with that. Okay, so here you go. This is a very workable approach to manage it. I don't have to call the assembly to review the law. I don't have to, ask the Amir to sign and review the law. I simply mentioned a bylaw or subsidiary document that is going to be changing dynamically, but you have to comply with it. Okay, so you can manage what's prescriptive and what's descriptive, and I think many compliance frameworks are really successful in this. And as Claudio said, it depends on the organization and how well the implementation is, right? So many organizations implemented ISO 27001, and they implemented it very well, and others not so well. So it depends on the organization.
Good, thank you. Arne?
Thank you, Jim. And I'd like to thank you for the question as well. And I think that's where a board perspective and a senior management perspective might shed some light as to how we would address that. Because what we look at is the governance framework that you have in place to manage security. We fully understand and appreciate that things are going to change. We actually bet on it, that things are going to go against us all the time. So from our perspective, what we look at is, do you cybersecurity professionals have a framework, a governance framework, to draw you through that process to develop that protection? We do really believe that things will change in a way that we can't anticipate. Snowden was one of those individuals who showed that there was backdoor access to applications and hardware. So we want to take comfort in knowing that you have a process that is consistent, that you apply diligently, and that you will get an outcome. Sometimes it's going to be positive, sometimes it's going to be negative. So from our perspective, and maybe that's something that, you know, when people talk about ISO 27000, that's really a framework. And in that you have your own practices that you put in place to meet those objectives of that standard. But really, how you decide to do that has got to be consistent. Because if it changes annually or, you know, biannually, you're going to have a pretty spotty record with respect to the performance you have on your cybersecurity endeavors. But if you have a consistent framework, I think you will help convince and assure the board and senior management that their faith in you is well placed.
Now, what's interesting is you point out, both of you pointed out, that there are basic information security processes that we need to continually refresh as technology changes. In some cases, I think we're learning lessons and applying them, and in others we're not. The two examples that I'd point to, a couple minutes ago I briefed two major breaches. The first one was the initial attack vector was through wireless attacks at a store level, at a retail level. And you know, I think the visibility that a number of those attacks got, a lot of the war driving activity, knock on wood, but we're not seeing a lot of wireless attack vectors right now. That could change, but people cleaned up. They started using encryption, they started securing their SSIDs, and it took a lot of that attack vector away. The one that bothers me is the destructive attacks that we've seen in the last couple of years that I don't think people are learning their lesson from. Saudi Aramco was the first big one. Then we saw the Dark Soul Shamoon attacks in Korea, and the same thing hit Sony a good year later. I think we really, as a community, need to start paying attention to destructive attacks. We're starting to see some malware out there in the wild that has a destructive module that doesn't appear to be the primary intent, but it looks like the hackers are giving themselves an option. Okay, other questions? Well, I'd like to, not seeing any, and that may be the lighting, but I'd like to just close on one topic that a couple of you mentioned and that I was somewhat surprised at, but I think is very, very important, and that was the mention of taking security culture home with us, to our families, to our schools, to our youth. I see that as being so critical to our entire ecosystem going forward, is bringing our kids up with security awareness and security concern. I'm really excited to see some of the competitions that are starting now at elementary, high school, and college levels, where the organizations put together teams to compete in the cybersecurity arena. Any perspectives in particular here in the Gulf?
Yeah.
Please.
I think I see ICT Qatar doing positive things in community outreach. Maybe they can brief us later in later sessions. They are doing very good initiatives to outreach to schools, students, and making people aware. And I think also having something at school level that, like, it would be a good thing. The curricula need to reflect this important aspect, because it's going to get only more and more important for us to have information security or IT security as part of our day-to-day life, because that's even sometimes our own life or our own survival depend on it. Like now we have medical devices, like we have someone from actually the medical industry, and we know that some medical devices are, they need to be managed securely, and so even our own life, depends on it. So I think that's very important, and not only that, even in universities, even in IT colleges, people don't teach security properly. Developers who are supposed to be building systems securely are, I can show you, you will be amazed. Even the examples in the curriculum have SQL injection in them. So, that's how bad it is, And I have to yet see any university implementing a program where they have actually not traditional security kind of thing, which is security software. I'm talking about software security. They are two completely different things, right? So, or even information security in general, like how to build things securely, how to, when we are architecting our information systems, we do failure modes, we do threat modeling, we do all of this. It's not part of the even postgraduate studies. It's not there. So we need to, maybe we have some research people. Mark can refer on this. So I think Mark agrees with me on this, and that the academia has to actually forget about schools, forget about elementary schools, even graduate, undergraduate, and postgraduate. They are not up to the task. So we need to obviously do something about it.
Well, we certainly share a concern there.
I can add one point only here. Yes, especially in our national and GCC area, safety, there are a lot of importance they are giving to the school students and the educational institutions. Of course, just what could be this approach is very good, that let us identify even personnel, school, or any of the organization, the information assets, paper, people, software, equipment, electronic, whatever the services, identify that and give the necessary information to students, how to protect it, what are the pros and cons on this, how to secure it. If you are using your curriculum activities or any your mobile phones, for example, or any of this, what you are using these assets are, how much you secured on this. So give such type of informations to that level. Of course, that culture can develop and the students can get more secure information. I agree with you. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. We have one more?
One last question or comment before we get to the panel.
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Mohammed Deljazar, and I'm with Qatar University, and I appreciate the gentleman's question. At Qatar University, there are some courses that are very technical on cyber, well, I should say hacking, or from a computer science program. This is very technical. But I was very surprised actually to see some information security sessions, high level compliance standards and things like that in the Masters of Accounting program, out of all places. I had no idea. I am aware of plans to address this issue, and this was initiated by ICT Qatar in communication with ICT Qatar. Actually, they approached the university, and we wanted to do this. I cannot speak for the university, but I know that there are plans to do something like this. The problem is that the demand, or we don't know if there is enough interest from the students. There's a lot of demand in the market, but the interest from the student side, that's going to affect it. The other thing that I'm aware of is that the community college here in Qatar, in Doha, is planning to have an information technology program and a separate track, I think, for information for IT security. So that should also prepare, should provide more blood into the community, the technical community in the future, hopefully. So there are some things that are happening. Not enough, but it's happening.
Good. Thank you.
But again, usually you see the focus is on, you know, the traditional security disciplines such as ethical hacking or network security or this, you know, cryptography. These are the traditional things. But what you really want to see that the software engineering course needs to have, you know, SDLC security built into it, you know, integrated into it. You need to see all of the operational and software development courses, you know, integrate this, you know, security, secure design and secure implementation concepts as part of the, because we get students who actually you know, universities churn out students who are actually taught to develop insecurely, you know. And I mentioned that now. The example actually in the course, the example has an SQL injection in it, okay, and other, you know, code injection vulnerabilities. So that's what worries me, and that's what actually has the potential to affect real change in the industry. Yeah, you churn it, you know, the mill actually is churning out students who have zero knowledge about how to build systems. They know cryptography, they know hacking, they know all of these things, but they don't know how to build things securely.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing such interest now in application security, because we see that being another vector over and over again. So thank you very much. I personally would like to thank the panel. Arn, Claudio, Abdul, Yasser, I think you've brought great perspective to this discussion, and I thank you. And I think we five do not want to be standing between you all and lunch. So it's probably that time.
I'd like to thank all the panelists again and Jim for this interesting and interactive moderation. There were two things that were quite evident from today's session. Number one is that I believe we all agree none of us are cyber secure. There was not one person who would say, oh yes, my company is fully secured, or I know I can secure it. And two is building the culture of cyber security, which I believe also starts at the very early age, because we have learned a lot of habits and it's difficult to unlearn. However, if it starts at an early age, and if that culture is imbibed onto them, I suppose they would be a lot better than what we are. So as a community, as an industry, we are able to protect collectively and proactively. So I'd like to thank all the speakers of today's session. Tomorrow we start at 9:50 with an opening remark. There's a panel discussion, some networking, and another panel discussion. Today's conference sessions ends with this panel discussion. Lunch is served at the Crossroads restaurant in level 3. If any of you would like to meet with the suppliers that are out there, please feel free. The doors are open until 4:30, so you can have your lunch, come back, chill with the suppliers, and tomorrow morning as well. Registration starts at 8:30, so if you'd like to have meetings, please feel free, join us early. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and one last round of applause for all the speakers that shared their experience. Thank you.
Thank you.